Hi guys, and welcome to the Gentle History podcast. Tonight you find yourself standing beneath an enormous evening sky stretching endlessly over the 1846 Prairie. The last traces of daylight fade into a cold blue horizon, and the wooden wheels of your covered wagon sit quietly in the frozen grass. The canvas above you trembles softly as the first sharp winds begin to arrive. Snowflakes drift through the air like tiny pieces of ash from a distant fire, landing on your coat, your hands, and the worn leather straps holding your belongings together. You can smell the dry grass beneath the cold air, the faint smoke from a small cooking fire, and the earthy scent of animals resting nearby. Somewhere beyond the wagon circle, horses shift their weight nervously. Oxen breathe clouds of steam into the darkness. The prairie, which seemed endless and welcoming only hours ago, now feels enormous and strangely silent. And here comes the little reality check. You probably will not survive this night by simply pulling a blanket over your head and hoping the weather gets bored and leaves. The prairie does not care about your comfort, your plans, or your carefully packed travel bags. It is a place where a beautiful sunset can become a serious threat within hours. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in for this journey through the winter prairie, tell us where you are listening from and what time it is where you live. It is always fascinating to imagine these distant moments from history being experienced by people all around the world. Now dim the lights and allow yourself to step into the quiet world of the American frontier, where a single night inside a covered wagon will reveal patience, fear, courage, and the simple determination to see another sunrise. You're not arriving on the prairie as a hero from a storybook. You're not wearing a perfectly clean coat, carrying unlimited supplies, or moving through a carefully prepared adventure. You're a traveller surrounded by ordinary people who have chosen an extraordinary path. Your wagon is filled with the objects that represent an entire life packed into a small wooden space. A few cooking tools, extra clothing, bedding, food supplies, personal belongings that could not be left behind. The covered wagon itself is both your home and your protection. Its curved wooden frame supports a canvas cover stretched tightly above you, creating a small shelter against the open world. It looks sturdy from a distance, but standing beside it on this cold evening, you understand something important. This wagon was never designed to defeat nature. It was designed to help people endure it. The prairie around you belongs to a world before highways, modern weather reports, and heated vehicles. Travelers crossing these lands depended on observation and experience. They watched clouds, studied wind direction, listened to animals, and noticed changes in temperature. A sudden shift in the sky could mean the difference between reaching safety and spending a dangerous night exposed to the elements. A well-known fact about westward migration is that thousands of families travelled across routes such as the Oregon Trail during the 19th century, seeking new opportunities in the American West. Many imagined the journey as a path toward a better future, but the reality involved exhaustion, illness, difficult terrain, and unpredictable weather. The adventure was not simply a movement across land. It was a test of endurance repeated day after day. You look around at the people nearby and notice that everyone has become quieter. Conversations that were lively during the afternoon now become shorter. Hands move faster while securing loose equipment. Blankets are folded carefully. Food is checked again. Nobody wants to admit how serious the approaching storm might become, but everyone feels it. There is something almost strange about the way humans behave before danger. People continue performing small ordinary tasks because routine creates comfort. Someone adjusts a saddle. Someone repairs a strap. Someone checks the animals one more time. These simple actions become a way of saying, we're still in control. A curious detail from frontier life is that some travellers carried unusual remedies and protective beliefs with them, including various homemade mixtures thought to help against illness or harsh conditions. Not every idea had scientific value, But these traditions reveal something deeply human. When people faced uncertainty, they searched for anything that offered a sense of security. The wind grows stronger as you watch the last warm colours disappear from the sky. The prairie grass bends in waves beneath the growing force of the weather. Snow begins falling more steadily now, covering tracks and softening the outlines of the wagons around you. The trail that was visible earlier starts fading into a blank landscape. You step closer to the wagon and feel the temperature drop in through your clothing. The cold is not dramatic at first. It does not arrive like a sudden attack. Instead, it slowly takes space. It settles into your fingers. It touches your face. It reminds you that the human body is fragile when placed against the endless scale of winter. Historians still argue whether some accounts of frontier hardship were exaggerated by later writers seeking to create dramatic tales of survival, or whether many travellers truly experienced conditions as severe as described in their journals and memories. The truth is likely somewhere between these views. The prairie could be beautiful and generous, but it could also become dangerous with little warning. Inside the wagon you prepare for the night ahead. The small interior feels crowded yet strangely comforting. The canvas walls separate you from the enormous darkness outside. Every object has a purpose. Every inch of space matters. You begin arranging yourself around survival rather than convenience. The storm has not fully arrived yet. That is what makes the waiting so unsettling. You listen. You feel the wagon move slightly beneath the pressure of the wind. You hear the distant sounds of animals and the occasional crack of wood. You smell smoke from the fading fire, and you realize that the most difficult part of the night may not be the cold itself. It may be the uncertainty, the waiting, the question hanging quietly in every traveller's mind. How long will this storm last? For now you remain beside the wagon, watching the prairie disappear beneath falling snow, knowing that the peaceful journey of the afternoon has transformed into something far more serious. The night is only beginning. The covered wagon becomes your entire world as darkness settles over the prairie. Outside, the open land that seemed limitless during the day has transformed into a cold and unfamiliar space. The canvas above you shakes gently with every stronger gust, creating a strange rhythm that follows you into the evening. The sound is not loud enough to feel like an immediate threat, but it is constant enough to remind you that the storm is gathering strength. You run your hand along the wooden frame of the wagon and feel the rough surface beneath your fingers. This simple structure, built by craftsmen and repaired by travellers many times before, now carries the responsibility of protecting everyone inside. It is not a house with thick walls, a warm stove and a secure roof. It is a moving shelter designed for a world where comfort must be carried on wheels. You begin organising the small space carefully. Every blanket has a place. Every bag must be positioned where it can be reached quickly. Food supplies are checked one more time. A small container of water is moved away from the coldest edge of the wagon. Personal items are pushed aside to create room for people to sit close together. Inside the wagon, the air is warmer than outside, but warmth is difficult to create and even harder to keep. Your breath still appears faintly in the cold air. The blankets feel heavy, but not completely comforting. You understand that surviving the night will depend on small decisions repeated over many hours. The covered wagon has become a symbol of westward movement, but behind that symbol were thousands of practical challenges. These vehicles carried families, tools, clothing and supplies across enormous distances. A mainstream historical fact is that many pioneer wagons were not actually the huge vehicles often shown in popular imagination. Most were smaller and more practical, designed to carry essential goods while remaining light enough for difficult travel. You look around at the people sharing this cramped shelter and notice how quickly everyone adapts. The person who was joking beside the fire earlier now quietly folds clothing. Someone else checks the entrance flap again, making sure the wind cannot pull it open. Another traveller carefully wraps a fragile object that has survived the journey so far. There is a quiet understanding between everyone inside. No one needs to explain the seriousness of the weather. The storm speaks clearly through the walls of the wagon. Outside, the prairie wind begins pushing snow across the ground. It moves in thin streams that slide between the wheels and around the animals resting nearby. The landscape slowly disappears beneath a white covering. The trail marks vanish. The familiar shapes of nearby wagons become harder to recognize. You think about how different this night feels compared with the morning. Earlier, the trail seemed full of possibility. The sun warmed your face. The animals moved steadily forward. The prairie stretched ahead like an invitation. Now the same landscape feels mysterious and powerful. That contrast was one of the realities of frontier travel. Nature was never simply beautiful scenery. It was a force that could provide resources one moment and create danger the next. A quirky detail from wagon journeys is that travellers often became extremely creative when trying to protect their limited supplies. People repaired clothing repeatedly, reused containers, and found new purposes for ordinary objects because replacing items during a long journey was nearly impossible. A simple piece of fabric or a spare piece of leather could become surprisingly valuable when hundreds of miles separated you from the nearest settlement. You pull your blanket closer and listen to the conversations around you. They are quieter now, but they continue. Stories are shared, memories of distant homes are mentioned. Someone remembers a warmer evening from another part of the journey. Someone laughs softly at an old mistake made on the trail. These small moments matter. When people face uncertainty, they often return to familiar stories. A memory becomes a source of warmth. A simple joke becomes a reminder that life continues beyond the storm. The smell inside the wagon changes as the evening progresses. There is the scent of wool blankets, leather equipment, stored food, and smoke carried in from outside. It is not the comfortable smell of a modern home, but it is the smell of shelter. It is the smell of people creating safety in a place that offers very little. Historians still argue whether many pioneer diaries accurately captured the emotional experience of these journeys, or whether later generations added extra drama to create stronger stories of hardship and bravery. Personal accounts can sometimes exaggerate fear or suffering, but they also reveal something important. Travellers were not only moving across land, they were constantly negotiating with uncertainty. The storm continues to grow. You notice the wagon rocking slightly as stronger winds strike the side. The wooden wheels remain still beneath the snow-covered ground. The animals outside become restless. Their movements create small sounds that reach you through the canvas walls. Someone suggests checking the animals again, but the others hesitate. Going outside means stepping directly into the freezing wind and darkness. Every action now requires careful thought. This is the strange balance of survival. You must act, but you must also conserve energy. You must protect what you have, but you cannot waste precious warmth. You must remain calm, even when the environment around you feels overwhelming. You settle deeper into the wagon and look toward the small opening where the outside world can be seen. Snow moves through the darkness like a curtain. The stars have disappeared. The prairie has become a place of wind, cold, and silence. Yet inside this fragile shelter, there is still humanity. There are people breathing. There are hands holding blankets. There are voices sharing memories. There is a small community refusing to surrender to the storm. The covered wagon may be surrounded by a vast frozen wilderness, but for this moment, it is a place of connection. It is a tiny circle of warmth surrounded by a world that feels endless. And as the night deepens, you begin to understand that the wagon is not protecting you because it is strong. It is protecting you because everyone inside is working together to make it strong. The first hours of the storm pass slowly, almost strangely slowly. Time feels different when you're inside a small wagon surrounded by darkness. During ordinary travel, hours are measured by distance. You watch the trail behind you, count miles ahead, and notice landmarks along the way. But tonight there is no movement. There is only the sound of wind, the shifting of snow, and the steady effort to remain warm. You wake from brief moments of rest whenever the wagon shakes. The canvas above you snaps softly. The wooden frame creaks under the pressure of the weather. Each sound makes you wonder whether the storm has grown stronger, or whether your imagination is simply filling the silence between gusts. Outside, the prairie has changed completely. The open grassland that welcomed you earlier has become a world of swirling snow. The horizon has vanished. The ground and sky seem to blend together into one endless grey darkness. This is the terrifying beauty of a prairie blizzard. It does not need mountains, cliffs, or forests to feel overwhelming. The emptiness itself becomes powerful. You think about the travellers who crossed these lands before you, and those who will follow after. The prairie routes were not simple roads marked with signs and comfortable stops. They were paths created by countless footsteps, wagon wheels, and memories. Every journey depended on reading the land carefully. A mainstream historical fact is that many 19th century travellers used natural signs such as the position of the sun, river crossings, landmarks, and weather patterns to navigate before modern navigation technology existed. Guides and experienced travellers carried knowledge that could mean the difference between reaching safety and becoming lost. Tonight, however, even experience has limits. The storm is too large. The landscape is hidden. The familiar trail has disappeared beneath snow. You understand why weather was one of the greatest fears among frontier travellers. A person could be skilled, prepared, and determined, yet still face conditions beyond human control. Inside the wagon, everyone begins adjusting to the reality of the night. There is less movement now because movement uses energy. The excitement of preparing has faded, replaced by a quieter routine. Someone checks the supplies. Someone rearranges blankets. Someone listens carefully for changes outside. You notice the importance of small comforts. A warm piece of clothing, a shared meal, a familiar voice speaking softly. These things seem ordinary during peaceful times, but in the middle of a storm they become precious. There is something deeply human about creating order during uncertainty. The wagon is filled with small acts of organization because people need something they can control. The storm cannot be commanded. The wind cannot be negotiated with. The snow will continue falling whether anyone is ready or not. But a blanket can be folded. A fire can be protected. A person beside you can be comforted. And sometimes those small actions are enough. A curious detail from frontier travel is that some wagon groups developed their own customs for dealing with difficult nights. Travellers often shared information, traded supplies, and supported one another because cooperation increased everyone's chances of success. The image of the lonely pioneer travelling completely alone is often exaggerated. Many journeys depended on groups working together. You listen as someone nearby quietly tells a story from another storm. The details are not dramatic. There is no grand speech about bravery. It is simply a memory of cold hands, tired animals, and waiting for morning. Yet those ordinary descriptions reveal the reality of survival better than any heroic tale. The storm outside continues its endless conversation with the wagon. The wind rises, the wind fades. Snow taps against the canvas. Then the wind returns. You begin noticing sounds that you ignored earlier. The tiny movements of people adjusting their position. The rustle of fabric. The soft breathing of others resting nearby. The occasional sound of the animals outside. The wagon is no longer just a vehicle. It has become a small living space where every sound tells a story. Historians still argue whether some famous descriptions of prairie blizzards represent typical experiences for travellers or the most extreme examples preserved because they were memorable. Not every journey ended in disaster. and many travellers successfully crossed harsh landscapes. However, the fear of sudden winter storms was very real, because conditions could change faster than people could respond. You look toward the entrance of the wagon and imagine what lies beyond the canvas. The thought of stepping outside feels almost impossible. The darkness hides everything. The cold waits immediately beyond the thin barrier protecting you. Modern travellers might find it difficult to imagine relying on such a simple shelter. Today, many people experience winter storms from behind insulated walls, with electricity, heating systems, and instant communication. The people inside this wagon have none of those advantages. Their preparation is carried in their hands, their experience, and their ability to remain calm. The hours continue. There is no dramatic moment when the storm announces its arrival as the greatest challenge. Instead, difficulty arrives gradually. It comes through the cold that settles deeper. It comes through tiredness. It comes through the uncertainty of not knowing how many hours remain until sunrise. You begin to understand that survival is often less about a single heroic action and more about endurance. It is about staying awake when you want to sleep. It is about saving energy when you want to move. It is about remaining hopeful when the landscape outside gives you very little reason to feel comfortable. The wagon creaks again. Someone quietly asks whether the storm seems stronger. No one answers immediately. Everyone listens. For a moment, the only sound is the wind moving across the frozen prairie. Then someone softly says that morning will come. It is a simple statement. It is not a guarantee, but it is enough. You settle back beneath the blankets and let the rhythm of the storm surround you. The prairie remains enormous. The cold remains powerful. The night remains uncertain. Yet inside this small wooden shelter, surrounded by strangers who have become companions, you discover something that every traveller before you understood. The storm may control the world outside, but inside the wagon, people still have choices. They can share warmth. They can share stories. They can wait together. And for now, waiting is enough. The storm continues through the night, but your thoughts begin drifting backward toward the journey that brought you here. Before the wind surrounded the wagon, before the snow erased the trail, there was the long rhythm of travel across the American frontier. Days were measured by distance, weather, and the slow movement of animals pulling heavy loads across unfamiliar ground. You remember the mornings when the wagon train began moving before the sun climbed too high. The air was cooler then, and the prairie carried the scent of grass touched by morning dew. Travellers prepared simple breakfasts, packed away bedding, and checked every strap and wheel before beginning another day. The work was repetitive, but repetition was what kept people moving. Now, sitting inside the wagon during the storm, you realize how much effort had already gone into reaching this point. The danger of tonight did not appear suddenly. It followed hundreds of small decisions made every day. The choice of where to stop. The decision of when to continue. The careful management of food and supplies. The constant attention given to animals that provided transportation and labour. Life on the trail was not a single dramatic adventure. It was a collection of ordinary moments where patience mattered more than excitement. You look around the wagon and notice the objects surrounding you. Each item tells a story. A cooking pot carries memories of meals prepared beside countless campsites. A worn blanket shows the passing of seasons. A small tool may have repaired a broken wheel or fixed a piece of equipment many miles earlier. Travellers could not carry everything they owned. Every object needed a purpose. Space was limited, weight mattered, and unnecessary possessions could become a burden. A comfortable life had to be reduced to essentials. A widely recognized fact about westward migration is that many families travelling during the 1840s and 1850s spent months on the trail, often covering hundreds or thousands of miles before reaching their destinations. The journey required careful planning because travellers depended on seasonal conditions available resources, and the ability to overcome unexpected problems. You think about the people who chose this difficult path. Some were searching for farmland, some wanted economic opportunity, some followed relatives or communities moving west, others simply hoped for a different future. Their reasons were personal, but the challenge they faced was shared. The prairie did not ask why they were travelling. The weather did not care about their dreams. The landscape demanded preparation from everyone equally. Inside the wagon, someone begins speaking quietly about the places left behind. A distant town, a family member who stayed home, a familiar road that will never feel the same again. These conversations appear naturally during difficult moments because storms have a way of making people reflect. You notice something interesting about human behaviour. When the outside world becomes uncertain, memories become a form of shelter. People return to stories because stories create connection. They remind everyone inside the wagon that they are more than travellers trying to survive. They're individuals carrying entire lives with them. A small and unusual detail from wagon travel is that many emigrants kept diaries or letters during their journeys, recording everything from weather changes to daily frustrations. Some entries included complaints about boredom, muddy roads, difficult meals, or the endless repetition of travel. These ordinary observations are valuable because they reveal that historical journeys were not lived as constant moments of adventure. Much of the experience was simply waiting, working, and continuing. The storm outside continues to hide the landscape, but your imagination returns to earlier days on the trail. You remember the open prairie beneath sunlight. You remember watching birds move across the sky and seeing animals graze in the distance. The same land that looked peaceful during the day could become intimidating at night. That contrast shaped the lives of travellers. Beauty and danger existed together. Opportunity and uncertainty travelled side by side. You begin wondering how people managed emotionally during such long journeys. It was not only the physical hardship that challenged them. Months away from familiar places created loneliness and stress. Communities had to form quickly because cooperation was not just helpful, it was necessary. People shared knowledge about routes, water sources, weather patterns, and difficult sections of the journey. Someone who had crossed a particular area before could provide advice to those travelling behind. Experience moved through the wagon groups like an invisible resource. Researchers continue to discuss how much wagon communities relied on formal organisation compared with informal cooperation. Some historians emphasize the importance of established leadership and planned wagon groups, while others point to the everyday relationships between ordinary travellers as the real foundation of survival. The answer may include both. A journey across the continent required both structure and human kindness. You listen again to the storm and realize that the wagon is filled with examples of that cooperation. Someone shares a blanket. Someone offers a small amount of food. Someone checks whether another traveller is comfortable. These actions may seem minor, but in difficult conditions they become powerful. The night outside remains frozen and endless. Yet inside, people continue creating a small world. A world with conversation. A world with memory. A world with compassion. You place your hand against the side of the wagon and feel the vibrations of the wind. The structure is still holding. The people inside are still together. The journey is temporarily stopped, but it is not finished. That thought matters. A storm can interrupt movement, but it does not erase purpose. The travellers who crossed these lands were not defined only by the obstacles they faced. They were also defined by their ability to continue afterward. The morning would eventually arrive. The snow would eventually settle. The wheels would eventually move again. For now, though, you remain inside the covered wagon, surrounded by the quiet sounds of survival. The prairie has become a place of waiting, but waiting itself has become part of the journey, and as the wind continues across the frozen landscape, you begin to understand the deeper story of this night. It is not only about a storm, it is about the people who carried on despite it. The storm finally reveals its full strength. What began as a cold evening wind has become a living force surrounding the wagon. You can feel it pushing against the canvas, pressing against every seam and opening, searching for the smallest weakness. The prairie outside has disappeared completely. There is no trail, no distant tree line, no familiar landmark. Only darkness, snow, and the endless movement of air across the frozen ground. Inside the wagon, everyone understands that the journey has stopped. There is no discussion about continuing forward tonight. The animals cannot safely move through the storm. The trail cannot be seen. Even stepping short distance away from the wagon could become dangerous. The decision is made without needing many words. You stay. The covered wagon that carried you across miles of open country is now a shelter surrounded by uncertainty. You notice how quickly the meaning of the wagon has changed. Earlier it represented movement. It was a symbol of progress, a vehicle carrying hopes toward a new destination. Now it represents something different. It represents protection. It represents patience. It represents the simple goal of making it through the night. The people around you begin preparing for a longer wait. Supplies are moved closer. Blankets are arranged more carefully. Anything that might help preserve warmth becomes important. The smallest details suddenly matter. A loose piece of fabric is not just fabric anymore. A small amount of fuel is not just fuel anymore. A little extra food is not just food anymore. During difficult moments, ordinary objects gain new value. You understand why preparation was so important for people travelling across the 19th century American West. They could not simply solve problems by purchasing replacements or calling for assistance. Distance created a different relationship with possessions. Every tool, every piece of clothing, and every container had to earn its place. A common historical reality of wagon travel was that emigrants often carried supplies meant to last for many weeks, because settlements and trading opportunities could be far apart. Flour, preserved foods, tools, clothing materials, and repair equipment were carefully managed because running out of essentials could create serious difficulties. You look toward the supplies inside the wagon and imagine the decisions made before the journey began. Someone had to decide what was necessary and what could be left behind. Someone had to estimate how much food would be needed. Someone had to consider what might break and what repairs could be made along the way. Every choice carried consequences. The storm outside continues growing. The sound of the wind becomes deeper, almost like a constant roar moving across the prairie. Snow strikes the canvas in waves. Sometimes it sounds gentle, almost peaceful. Then a stronger gust arrives and reminds you that the world outside is not calm at all. You begin to understand that the greatest challenge is not one dramatic moment. It is the passing of time. Cold becomes difficult because it continues. Fear becomes difficult because it continues. Waiting becomes difficult because it continues. The human mind naturally searches for an ending, but during a storm like this, the ending cannot be seen. You cannot look outside and know when the clouds will disappear. You cannot measure exactly how many hours remain until sunrise. You simply endure. A curious detail about prairie survival is that some travellers developed strong habits of checking their surroundings repeatedly, even when there seemed to be no immediate change. They watched the sky, listened to animals, and examined equipment again and again. To someone from the modern world, this might seem unnecessary, but in an environment where conditions could change rapidly, careful observation became a survival skill. Inside the wagon, people continue finding ways to remain calm. A quiet conversation begins. Someone shares a memory from a previous journey. Someone talks about a place they hope to reach. The words are simple, but they create a feeling of normal life inside an abnormal situation. You realize that hope does not always appear as excitement. Sometimes hope is a person quietly making plans for tomorrow. Sometimes hope is saving a little food because you believe you will need it later. Sometimes hope is listening to someone tell a story while a storm surrounds you. The wagon becomes a small island of human activity in the middle of a frozen sea. You wonder what the travellers of this era truly felt during nights like this. Were they mostly afraid? Were they confident because they had experience? Did they underestimate the danger until it was too late? Scholars continue to examine personal journals, letters, and historical records to understand how ordinary travellers experienced moments of crisis. Some accounts emphasize fear and exhaustion, while others describe determination and calm problem-solving. The reality was probably complicated because people can feel many emotions at the same time. A person can be frightened and still act wisely. A person can be tired and still help others. A person can miss home and still believe in the future. The storm teaches you this slowly. You glance toward the people around you and notice the small signs of exhaustion. Faces are quieter. Movements are slower. Everyone is conserving energy. Yet there is also a strange sense of togetherness. A difficult situation has removed unnecessary distractions. Everyone now shares the same goal. Make it until morning. Outside, the animals remain an important concern. Their survival matters because they are essential to the journey continuing. The travellers know that the wagon cannot move without them. Their care is not simply practical. Many frontier families depended on their animals daily and formed strong bonds with the creatures that carried them across difficult landscapes. You listen carefully whenever sounds come from outside, a movement in the snow, a shift of weight, a faint noise carried through the wind. Each sound creates a moment of attention before the wagon becomes quiet again. The storm feels endless, but time continues moving. That is one of the strange things about difficult nights. They can feel frozen while still passing minute by minute. Every hour survived is an achievement, even if nothing dramatic happens. You remain inside the wagon, wrapped in layers of clothing and blankets, watching the small world around you continue. The storm may have trapped you temporarily, but it has not defeated you. The wagon still stands. The people are still together. The journey is still waiting. And somewhere beyond the darkness, beyond the snow, beyond the powerful wind sweeping across the prairie, morning is slowly making its way closer. The deepest part of the night arrives quietly. There is no single moment when you realize the storm has become the hardest challenge. There is no dramatic announcement from the sky. Instead, the cold slowly settles deeper into the wagon, the hours stretch longer, and your body begins to understand the effort required simply to remain comfortable. You shift beneath the blankets, searching for a position that feels warmer. The space inside the wagon is limited, and everyone has learned to move carefully. A sudden movement can disturb another person trying to rest. A misplaced item can block the small area needed for someone else. The wagon is crowded, but the closeness also provides something valuable. Warmth. Human warmth. The people inside the wagon become part of the shelter itself. Outside, the blizzard continues. The wind pushes against the canvas walls, but inside you focus on the small things that can be controlled. A blanket pulled tighter around your shoulders, a coat adjusted around your body, a careful arrangement of supplies to reduce drafts. Survival during a prairie winter is not always about dramatic actions. Often it is about hundreds of small decisions repeated over many hours. You learn to conserve movement. You learn to protect energy. You learn that patience can be just as important as strength. The wagon becomes a place where everyone follows an unspoken rhythm. Someone checks the entrance covering. Someone watches the supplies. Someone quietly speaks with another traveller who cannot sleep. Nobody wants to waste energy, but nobody wants anyone to feel completely alone either. This balance between independence and cooperation was central to frontier life. A well-established fact about 19th century wagon travel is that emigrant groups often relied heavily on mutual assistance. A broken wheel, sick traveller, injured animal, or difficult stretch of terrain could affect everyone. Helping others was not simply an act of kindness. It was often necessary for the entire group to continue. You look around and see this idea in practice. A person shares a warmer piece of clothing. Someone offers reassurance. Another traveller remembers where a spare tool was stored. These actions are quiet, almost invisible, but they are the reason communities survived harsh conditions. The storm outside does not care about individual stories. It does not know who planned carefully or who worried about reaching their destination. It does not know who left behind a comfortable home or who carried memories of a distant family. The wind treats everyone the same. That is why preparation mattered so much. You think about the clothing worn by travellers during this period. It was not designed for style or appearance. Clothing had to serve practical purposes. Layers were important because temperatures could change dramatically between daytime and nighttime. Wool, leather, and heavy fabrics help protect people from the elements. A small historical curiosity from frontier clothing is that travellers often repaired garments repeatedly rather than replacing them. A coat could be patched many times. A pair of boots might be strengthened with new materials when worn down. Clothing carried evidence of the journey itself, showing every repair and every difficult season survived. You touch the sleeve of your coat and imagine all the miles it has travelled. The fabric carries dust from previous campsites. It carries the smell of smoke from countless fires. It carries the memory of warm afternoons and freezing mornings. Objects become witnesses. They silently record human experiences. As the night continues, the conversation inside the wagon becomes softer. People speak less about the storm and more about ordinary things. Someone talks about a favourite meal from home. Someone remembers a familiar landscape. Someone wonders how far away their destination might be now. These thoughts are not distractions. They are reminders. The people inside the wagon are not simply surviving a weather event. They are protecting the dreams that brought them here. You begin wondering how many travellers experienced moments exactly like this. How many families sat inside small wagons listening to winter winds? How many people looked toward the darkness outside and questioned whether the journey was worth the hardship? Historians still argue whether the image of the determined pioneer facing every challenge with complete confidence reflects reality, or whether many travellers experience much greater doubt and emotional struggle than traditional stories suggest. Personal accounts reveal both courage and uncertainty. The people of the frontier were neither fearless heroes nor helpless victims. They were ordinary people adapting to extraordinary circumstances. The cold continues. You notice the smallest signs of it. The stiffness in your fingers, the chill near the edges of the wagon, the way everyone pulls blankets closer without even thinking. Yet there is also a strange calm that appears after hours of facing difficulty. The first fear has passed. The storm is no longer an unknown visitor. It has become the reality of the night. Sometimes familiarity makes hardship easier to carry. You know the sound of the wind now. You know the movement of the wagon. You know the voices of the people around you. The unknown has become something you understand. Outside, the animals remain part of your thoughts. Their presence reminds you that the journey depends on more than human effort. The animals have carried heavy loads across difficult terrain and now face the same weather as everyone else. Their care becomes another responsibility during the long night. You listen for signs that they are still nearby, a movement, a sound, a brief interruption in the endless wind. Each reminder brings relief. The wagon feels small, but it contains everything needed for this moment. People, supplies, memories, hope. You think about how different this experience is from modern ideas of comfort. Today many people measure convenience by speed, faster transportation, faster communication, faster solutions. But inside this wagon, time moves differently. A single hour can feel enormous A small success can feel meaningful. A moment of warmth can feel like a gift. The storm continues outside, but inside you remain surrounded by determination. Nobody knows exactly what the morning will bring. The trail may be covered, the animals may be tired, the journey may become more difficult. But those problems belong to tomorrow. Tonight has only one purpose: endure. You close your eyes for a moment and listen to the steady sounds around you. The breathing of others, the movement of the wagon, the endless prairie wind. The night is still long, the storm is still strong, but you are still here, and sometimes, in the middle of the harshest conditions, that simple fact is the greatest comfort of all. The small fire outside becomes the center of everyone's thoughts. Earlier in the evening, the flames had been a simple comfort. They provided light while meals were prepared. They offered warmth while travelers talked and rested. They created a familiar scene that made the prairie feel less enormous. Now, in the middle of the blizzard, the fire has become something much more important. It represents survival. You know that every piece of fuel matters. Every small flame must be protected. Every moment of warmth must be used wisely. The prairie has no convenient supply of dry wood waiting nearby. The landscape that looks endless during daylight can become surprisingly difficult when travelers need something as basic as fuel. You think about how strange this feels. There is snow everywhere, yet fire remains difficult to maintain. The storm has provided plenty of one thing and taken away another. Water covers the ground, but warmth is rare. Outside the wagon, the wind continues sweeping across the open land. The snow hides the trail and covers the grass. The same conditions that create a beautiful winter landscape also create a serious problem for anyone trying to keep a fire alive. Inside the wagon, conversations turn toward the fire. People speak quietly about how much fuel remains and how long the flames can continue. Nobody wants to waste supplies, but nobody wants to lose the warmth completely. This is the difficult calculation of survival. Comfort must be balanced against necessity. A little more warmth now may mean less protection later. A little more fuel tonight may determine how difficult the morning becomes. Travellers on the frontier understood this kind of careful decision-making. A mainstream historical fact is that many emigrants crossing western routes had to carry or gather fuel along the way, because large forests were not always available on open plains. Some areas provided abundant resources, while others forced travellers to become creative with whatever materials they could find. The prairie demanded flexibility. People learned to adapt. They gathered grasses, dried plants, animal waste, and any other materials that could help create or maintain heat. These solutions were not always comfortable or familiar, but survival often required using what the environment provided. A curious detail from 19th century trail life is that dried buffalo chips, which were made from animal waste, were commonly collected in treeless regions and used as fuel by some travellers. To modern ears, this may sound unusual, but on the open plains where firewood was scarce, practical solutions mattered more than appearances. Frontier life often required people to reconsider what counted as valuable. You imagine travellers earlier in the day searching the landscape for anything useful. A small bundle of dry material collected here. A piece of discarded wood found there. Every resource gathered before the storm became important once the weather turned dangerous. Inside the wagon, you begin to understand why preparation before bad weather matters so much. The storm does not only test strength, it tests planning. A person who thought ahead has more options. A person who saves supplies has more time. A person who understands the environment has a better chance of adapting. The fire outside flickers in your imagination. You cannot see it clearly from where you sit, but you know its condition matters. The wind threatens to weaken it. Snow threatens to cover it. Every gust feels like a challenge. Someone carefully checks the fire, moving quickly despite the cold. The person does not stay outside longer than necessary. The danger of losing body heat is always present. A simple task becomes a careful operation. The wagon group has learned something important. The storm is not defeated by one great action. It is managed through many small efforts. A person adds fuel. Another protects the entrance. Someone checks the animals. Someone shares warmth. Someone keeps spirits from falling. Together, these actions create a barrier against the weather. Historians still debate whether pioneer accounts describing extreme fuel shortages during winter travel were common experiences or examples of especially difficult journeys that survived in written memory. Records vary because different routes, seasons, and locations created very different challenges. Some travellers crossed plains with enough resources, while others faced conditions that tested every decision. You look outside again and think about the landscape beyond the wagon. The prairie is both generous and unforgiving. It provides grass for animals, space for travel, and resources for those who know how to find them. Yet it does not offer comfort automatically. People had to learn its language. They had to understand its signs. They had to recognize what the land could provide and what it could take away. The fire becomes more than a source of heat. It becomes a reminder of human creativity. Long before modern conveniences, people survived by observing, experimenting, and sharing knowledge. A small flame represents thousands of years of human adaptation. You watch the faces around you illuminated by the faint glow. The light is weak compared with the lamps and electricity of the modern world, but it feels powerful because everyone understands what it means. The fire says that the night has not won. The fire says there is still warmth. The fire says there is still a reason to hope. The storm continues outside, but the people inside the wagon continue making choices. They do not control the weather. They cannot stop the wind or command the snow to disappear. But they can protect the fire. They can protect each other. They can wait. The hours move slowly. The flames rise and fall. The wagon remains surrounded by darkness, yet the small circle of warmth continues holding. You begin to see the true challenge of this night. It is not simply surviving cold. It is preserving the small things that make survival possible. A little heat, a little food, a little courage, a little hope. And as the blizzard continues across the prairie, the fragile fire outside the wagon becomes a symbol of everything the travellers are fighting to protect. Not just warmth, life itself. The night settles into a strange rhythm. The storm no longer feels like something arriving. It feels like something that has always been there. The wind moves across the prairie with endless patience, rising and falling like a great breath passing over the frozen earth. Inside the wagon, you begin recognizing its different sounds. The sharp whistle that slips through small openings, the heavy push against the canvas, the low rumble that makes the wooden frame tremble. You never imagined that a simple wagon could make so many sounds. The creaking wood, the shifting ropes, the soft movement of blankets, the quiet footsteps of someone adjusting supplies. Every noise becomes part of the night. You lie awake for a moment, listening carefully. In a modern world, silence often means peace. Here, silence can feel uncertain. When the wind briefly becomes quieter, you notice how much you depend on its familiar sound. The sudden stillness makes you wonder what is happening outside. Then another gust arrives, and the question disappears. The prairie answers in its own way. The people inside the wagon have learned to listen. They listen for changes in the weather. They listen for the animals. They listen for one another. Hearing becomes a form of awareness because sight is almost useless in the darkness and blowing snow. Outside, the world remains hidden. Inside, sound tells the story. You hear the animals shifting nearby. They have endured long days of travel and now face the same freezing conditions as everyone else. Their movements remind you that the wagon journey was never only a human effort. The entire group depended on the strength and endurance of the animals. A well-known aspect of 19th century overland travel is that oxen were commonly used to pull many emigrant wagons because they were strong, dependable, and able to survive difficult conditions. They moved slowly compared with horses, but their endurance made them valuable companions on long journeys. You imagine the animals standing in the snow, their bodies covered with frost, waiting for the storm to pass. Travellers understood that caring for animals was essential. A weakened animal meant a slower journey. A lost animal could mean serious trouble. The storm creates a strange feeling of isolation, but you're not truly alone. The wagon group is nearby. The animals are nearby. The fire still glows. The storm surrounds everyone equally. You notice how the people inside begin developing small habits during the long wait. Someone occasionally checks the supplies without moving them unnecessarily. Someone quietly counts remaining portions of food. Someone adjusts the blanket covering another person who has fallen asleep. These actions are not announced. Nobody receives praise. They simply happen. That is often how communities survive difficult moments. Not through dramatic speeches, but through ordinary care repeated again and again. A fascinating detail from frontier travel is that many emigrant groups had unwritten rules about sharing assistance during emergencies. A person who had extra knowledge, equipment, or experience often became valuable to everyone around them. The strongest groups were not always the largest or wealthiest. They were often the ones where people were willing to cooperate. The wagon feels like a small village tonight. Temporary village built from wood, canvas, and trust. You think about how different this experience is from the way people often imagine travel. Today, journeys are usually associated with movement and arrival. The destination is the focus. The time spent getting there is often something to pass through. For these travellers, the journey itself was a major part of life. Days were spent walking beside wagons, repairing equipment, preparing meals, finding water, caring for animals, and making decisions about the road ahead. The journey shaped people because there was no way to separate daily life from survival. Every sunrise brought new tasks. Every evening brought new challenges. Tonight simply happens to be one of the hardest. You listen as someone quietly tells another traveller that storms like this were feared by many families crossing the plains. The danger was not always obvious before it arrived. A clear day could change quickly. A comfortable camp could become a difficult place to remain. Researchers have examined many accounts of prairie weather and continue to discuss how travellers understood and predicted these storms. Some relied heavily on personal experience and traditional knowledge, while others adapted information from guides, military reports, and local observations. The ability to recognize warning signs was one of the most valuable skills on the trail. You think back to the sky earlier that day. Perhaps there were clues, a change in the clouds, a different feeling in the air, a shift in the wind. Nature often whispers before it becomes loud. The challenge was knowing how to listen. Inside the wagon, the hours continue passing. Sleep comes briefly and disappears again. Your body wants rest, but your mind remains alert. Every traveller experiences this strange state of being tired yet unable to fully relax. You understand why. The human body knows when it is surrounded by uncertainty. Even while resting, part of you remains connected to the storm. You notice the smell of the wagon more clearly now. The scent of wool, leather, smoke, and stored supplies fills the small space. It is the smell of travel. It is the smell of people living with limited resources and making the most of what they have. There is something comforting about these familiar scents. They remind you that this is still a human place, not a battlefield, not an empty wilderness. A small group of people has created a temporary home in the middle of a powerful landscape. The wagon walls may be thin, the storm may be strong, but the people inside continue creating a sense of normal life. Someone whispers, someone rests, someone remembers a warmer day, someone waits for morning, And slowly you begin to understand the hidden strength of this night. The travellers are not defeating the storm in the way stories often describe. They are not conquering nature, they are accepting it, they are adapting to it, they are surviving beside it. The wind continues its endless journey across the prairie, the snow continues falling, the wagon continues standing. And beneath the trembling canvas, surrounded by darkness and the quiet sounds of endurance, you remain part of this small human circle waiting for dawn. The hours before dawn are often the most difficult. The first fear of the storm has passed. The preparations are complete. The supplies have been organized. The fire has been protected. The wagon has held against the strongest wind so far. Yet now comes the long stretch of waiting. You begin to understand why endurance was such an important part of frontier life. The greatest challenge is not always the moment when danger arrives. Sometimes it is the quiet period afterward, when you must continue making careful decisions while your body grows tired. Inside the wagon, hunger begins to appear slowly, not the dramatic hunger of adventure stories, but the simple feeling that comes when a person has spent hours awake, cold, and tense. The body asks for energy. The mind searches for comfort. A small meal becomes something worth appreciating. Food on the trail was never just about taste. It was about survival, planning, and preservation. Travelers had to carry items that could last for long periods without modern refrigeration. Flour, dried meat, beans, preserved fruits, and other durable supplies were common parts of many journeys. A significant fact about overland migration is that food planning was one of the most important preparations before leaving for a long wagon journey. Families often calculated supplies carefully because resupply points could be separated by many days of travel. A mistake in planning could create serious problems far from any settlement. You look at the supplies inside the wagon differently now. A small portion of food represents planning from weeks earlier. A simple meal represents someone's careful preparation. A shared drink represents cooperation. As things that seemed ordinary before the storm now carry greater meaning. Someone begins preparing a small meal. The movement is quiet and careful because everyone understands that supplies must be used wisely. There is no unnecessary waste. Every portion has a purpose. The smell of food slowly fills the wagon, mixing with the familiar scents of blankets, leather, and smoke. It is a comforting smell because it reminds everyone that despite the storm outside, there is still a sense of routine. There is something deeply reassuring about eating during difficult times. A meal says that life continues. A meal says that tomorrow is expected. A meal says that people still believe they will need strength for the future. You notice how the simple act of sharing food changes the atmosphere inside the wagon. Conversation becomes easier. Faces relax slightly. The storm remains outside, but for a brief moment everyone focuses on something ordinary. This is one of the quiet lessons of survival. Comfort does not always come from escaping difficulty. Sometimes comfort comes from creating small moments of normal life within difficulty. A curious detail from frontier meals is that travelers often adapted recipes based on available supplies and regional conditions. A meal prepared on the trail could be very different from what someone might have eaten at home. Creativity became necessary because familiar ingredients were not always available. The frontier kitchen was built around flexibility. You imagine the people who carried family recipes across hundreds of miles. Some meals were remembered not because they were luxurious, but because they reminded travelers of home. A taste could bring back an entire place. A smell could bring back a person. Food connected the past and the future. The storm continues outside, but inside the wagon memories begin to appear. Someone talks about a holiday meal from years earlier. Someone remembers a garden left behind. Someone describes a favorite dish that cannot be made on the trail. These conversations are not random. They're a way of keeping identity alive. A person can travel far from home without wanting to forget where they came from. You listen quietly and think about the emotional weight of migration. Moving west was not simply a physical journey. It meant leaving familiar places, familiar neighbours, and familiar routines. People carried hopes for the future, but they also carried memories of the past. Historians continue examining how emigrants balanced excitement about new opportunities with the emotional difficulty of leaving established communities behind. Personal letters and journals often reveal both optimism and sadness, showing that migration was rarely a simple story of adventure. It was a complicated human experience filled with hope, uncertainty, and sacrifice. The meal ends, and the wagon returns to its quiet rhythm. The wind is still there. The cold is still there. But something has changed. The people inside are stronger because they have shared another hour together. You notice that fear becomes smaller when it's divided among many people. One person alone inside a storm might feel overwhelmed. A group sharing the same experience creates something different. The burden does not disappear, but it becomes easier to carry. You look toward the entrance flap and imagine the endless prairie beyond it. The storm has covered everything. The trail has vanished. The destination feels impossibly far away. Yet everyone remains focused on the next step. Not the entire journey, not every future problem, only the next step. This way of thinking was essential for frontier travellers. 1,000-mile journey could feel impossible if considered all at once. Instead, people survived by focusing on daily tasks. Reach the next water source, repair the next problem, find the next safe place to rest. Tonight the next step is simple. Wait for morning. The wagon grows quieter as some travellers manage to sleep. Others remain awake, listening to the storm. You close your eyes and feel the exhaustion that has built over the night. The wagon rocks slightly. The wind continues. The snow continues. But somewhere beneath the cold and uncertainty, there is a growing sense that the hardest moments may be passing. You do not know this for certain. Nobody inside the wagon does. That is the nature of difficult journeys. You move forward without guarantees. You continue because stopping is not an option. And as you rest inside the small covered wagon, surrounded by people sharing food, stories, and patience, you begin to understand that survival is not only about resisting hardship. It is about preserving the small pieces of life that make hardship worth enduring. A warm meal, a familiar voice, a shared memory, a little hope. These are the things that carry people through the longest nights. The wagon has become quieter now, but sleep does not come easily. You can feel the exhaustion settling into your body. Your shoulders feel heavy. Your eyes want to close. Yet the storm outside keeps part of your mind awake. Every sound still carries meaning. Every movement still catches your attention. The people around you are experiencing the same strange mixture of tiredness and awareness. No one inside the wagon is exactly the same person they were when the storm began. Hours of uncertainty have a way of revealing people. The quiet person becomes the one who offers reassurance. The strongest person becomes the one who checks on others. The person who seemed nervous becomes the one who keeps everyone organized. A difficult night does not create character from nothing. It reveals the qualities people already carry. You look around the small interior of the wagon and begin noticing individual stories hidden among the blankets and supplies. Each traveller has arrived here through a different path. Each person carries memories, worries, and hopes that existed long before the blizzard arrived. The wagon is not filled with anonymous pioneers. It is filled with people. Someone may be thinking about a family member far away. Someone may be wondering what the future settlement will look like. Someone may be quietly questioning whether the journey was the right decision. These thoughts are rarely spoken aloud, but they exist. A mainstream understanding of westward migration is that many families travelled because they were seeking land, opportunity, or a different future. However, the decision to leave home was often emotionally complicated. Moving across the continent meant giving up familiarity in exchange for uncertainty. You imagine what it must have felt like to place your belongings into a wagon and know that returning would not be simple. The road ahead promised possibilities. The road behind contained memories. And somewhere between those two places, travellers found themselves inside moments like this one. The storm becomes a temporary community builder. People who may have been strangers earlier in the journey now depend on one another. The person sitting beside you might have been unknown days ago, but tonight their presence matters. This is one of the unexpected effects of hardship. It removes distance between people. You notice someone quietly repairing a small piece of equipment by the dim light. The task seems unnecessary at first. After all, the storm has stopped movement completely, but then you understand. The repair is not only about the object, it is about tomorrow. Keeping something useful is a way of preparing for the future. It is a quiet declaration that the journey will continue. A fascinating detail from frontier travel is that many emigrant groups included people with different skills who became valuable during difficult situations. A person who understood animals, another who knew repairs, another who had medical knowledge, or another who understood navigation could provide assistance when conditions became challenging. Survival often depended on the combined abilities of many individuals. You think about how every person inside the wagon contributes something. Not everyone contributes in the same way. Some provide knowledge, some provide labour, some provide encouragement, some simply provide companionship, and sometimes companionship is enough. The hours continue passing. The storm remains outside, but inside the wagon, conversations become more personal. The darkness creates a space where people share things they might not normally discuss during a busy day of travel. Someone remembers childhood. Someone talks about a place they miss. Someone describes a dream for the future. These stories float through the small space, mixing with the sounds of the storm. You realize that storytelling has a purpose beyond entertainment. Stories help people maintain connection with themselves and each other. They remind travelers that they are part of something larger than the immediate struggle. They are not just cold bodies waiting for morning. They are parents, children, friends, neighbours, dreamers. The storm cannot take those identities away. Researchers examining pioneer journals have often noted how frequently travellers recorded emotional experiences alongside practical details. They wrote about weather, supplies, and routes, but they also wrote about loneliness, hope, fear, and relationships. These records show that frontier history was not only about movement across land, it was also about the inner experiences of ordinary people. You listen as the wagon settles into another quiet period. The fire outside has become less visible. The wind has changed slightly. The people around you are resting more deeply. For a brief moment you feel something unexpected. Peace. Not because the situation is easy, not because the storm has disappeared, but because everyone has adapted. The unknown has become familiar. The fear has become patience. The waiting has become a shared experience. You think about how humans have always created communities in difficult places. Across deserts, mountains, oceans, and frozen landscapes, people have survived by forming connections. A single person may struggle against nature, but groups can create something stronger. They create support. They create knowledge. They create hope. Scholars have discussed how much of frontier survival came from individual determination compared with collective cooperation. Some stories emphasize personal courage and independence, while others highlight the importance of neighbors, family networks, and shared resources. The reality likely involved both. Individual strength mattered, but few people survived entirely alone. Inside this wagon, you see the truth of that balance. Every person must endure their own cold. Every person must maintain their own courage. But nobody has to face the night completely by themselves. You pull the blanket closer and listen to the breathing around you. The sound is surprisingly comforting. It reminds you that life continues. People are resting. People are waiting. People are trusting that morning will arrive. Outside, the prairie remains vast and powerful. The snow continues covering the land. The wind continues crossing the empty spaces. But inside this small wagon, there is a different kind of landscape. A landscape made of human voices, shared memories, small acts of kindness, and the quiet determination to continue. The storm has taken away movement, but it has created something else. Connection. As the night slowly moves forward, you realize that this may be the most important lesson of the prairie blizzard. Survival is not only about what you have, it is also about who stands beside you when what you have is not enough. The first signs of morning arrive so slowly that you almost do not notice them. At first, the darkness simply feels less complete. The blackness outside the wagon begins changing into a deep grey. The storm has not disappeared, but something about the world feels different. The wind no longer seems quite as powerful. The endless sound that filled the night has softened into occasional bursts moving across the frozen prairie. You open your eyes and remain still for a moment. The wagon is quiet. Not the uneasy silence of uncertainty from earlier, but the tired silence of people who have endured something difficult together. The night has left its mark. Everyone inside looks exhausted. Faces are pale from cold and lack of sleep. Clothing is wrinkled from hours spent in the same position. Hands move slowly as people begin waking and checking their surroundings. Yet beneath the exhaustion, there is something else. Relief. The storm did not take the wagon. The fire survived. The people are still together. Morning has arrived. You carefully push aside the blanket and feel the cold immediately. The air inside the wagon is still sharp, but compared with the world outside, it feels protected. The small shelter that seemed fragile yesterday now feels like something precious. You begin preparing yourself for the first look outside. Nobody rushes. After a night like this, the outside world must be approached carefully. The entrance flap is opened slightly, and a wave of cold air enters the wagon. Everyone pauses. The prairie beyond is almost unrecognizable. Snow covers everything. The trail has vanished. The familiar shapes of the landscape have changed. The storm has transformed the world overnight. You step outside and feel the snow beneath your boots. The cold air touches your face immediately. The sky is pale, and the morning light creates a strange, quiet beauty across the prairie. The storm that threatened survival now leaves behind a landscape that looks peaceful. This is one of nature's contradictions. The same force that creates danger can also create breathtaking scenes. You look back at the wagon and see it differently. The covered structure appears small against the enormous white landscape. It is difficult to imagine that so many people found shelter inside it during the night, but they did, and that simple fact carries meaning. A major aspect of 19th century wagon travel was that travellers had to constantly evaluate their conditions before continuing. Weather, terrain, animal health, and available supplies all influenced decisions. Moving forward too quickly could create new problems, while waiting too long could create different ones. The morning inspection begins. The animals are checked first. Their condition matters greatly because the journey cannot continue without them. Travellers look for signs of exhaustion, injury, or distress. The animals have endured the same storm, standing outside while humans remained protected beneath canvas. You notice the care people give them. These animals are not simply tools, they are essential partners in the journey. Someone clears snow from equipment. Someone checks the wagon wheels. Someone examines supplies that may have been affected by the storm. Every task provides information. Every observation helps answer an important question. Can we continue? A small but interesting detail from frontier journeys is that travellers often had to become skilled in many areas at once. A person might need to understand basic repairs, animal care, cooking, weather observation, and navigation. the journey rewarded practical knowledge because specialized services were usually far away. You watch people working and realize that survival created a different kind of education. The trail itself became a teacher. The lesson was not written in books, it was learned through experience. You notice small signs of the storm's power. Snow has gathered around the wagon wheels. Equipment that was left outside is covered. Tracks from the previous day have disappeared beneath the new surface. The landscape looks untouched, almost as if nobody has travelled here before. Yet you know there are people standing in this place who have just experienced one of the longest nights of their lives. You wonder how many travellers across history have looked at a similar sunrise after a difficult night. How many people have felt that same combination of exhaustion and gratitude? Historians still debate whether written memories of severe storms often focused more on dramatic survival moments than ordinary recovery afterward. Many accounts describe the danger clearly, but the quieter moments after the crisis can receive less attention. Yet those moments reveal something important. Survival was not only about escaping danger, it was about rebuilding routines afterward. The morning is not the end of the challenge, it is the beginning of the next one. The wagon must be prepared again. The route must be considered. Supplies must be checked. The journey must continue. You return briefly inside the wagon and notice how different the space feels now. Yesterday it was simply a vehicle. During the night it became a shelter. This morning it becomes a reminder of what was accomplished. The blankets, the supplies, the small spaces where people rested. Everything carries evidence of the storm. You hear quiet conversations about what happened. Some people describe the strength of the wind. Others talk about the cold. Some simply say they're grateful the wagon held. Nobody exaggerates. Nobody needs to. The experience speaks for itself. The prairie has taught another lesson. Humans are not powerful because they can control nature. They are powerful because they can adapt when nature refuses to be controlled. The sun rises higher, slowly warming the frozen landscape. The snow begins sparkling beneath the light. The storm has passed, but its memory remains. You stand beside the wagon and look across the prairie. The journey ahead is still long. There will be more difficult days. There will be more uncertain nights. But today, you know something you did not know yesterday. You know that this group can endure hardship. You know that the wagon can provide shelter. You know that even the most frightening night eventually becomes morning. And with that knowledge, the travellers begin preparing to move forward once again. The morning after, the blizzard is not filled with celebration. It is filled with work. This storm has passed, but the prairie does not immediately return to the gentle landscape you remember from the previous day. The snow remains deep. The wind still carries a sharp chill. The trail that guided the wagon forward has disappeared beneath a fresh layer of white. You stand beside the covered wagon and look across the open land. For a moment it feels impossible that this is the same place where you travelled before the storm. The prairie has been rewritten overnight. Yet the journey cannot remain paused forever. Slowly, carefully, people begin preparing to move again. The first task is clearing the wagon. Snow has gathered around the wheels and along the sides of the wooden frame. The same canvas that protected everyone during the night is now covered with frozen moisture. Hands become cold quickly while working, but everyone understands the importance of removing the snow before attempting to continue. You pick up a tool and begin helping. The work is slow, the snow is heavy. The cold makes every movement feel more difficult, but there is a familiar feeling in returning to action. After hours of waiting, doing something practical feels almost comforting. This is another reality of frontier travel. Survival was rarely one dramatic moment followed by an easy ending. Difficult events were often followed immediately by more tasks. People had to repair, rebuild, organize, and continue. A well-documented part of overland migration is that travellers frequently repaired their wagons throughout the journey because rough terrain, heavy loads, and changing weather placed constant pressure on equipment. A broken wheel or damaged wagon could create serious delays, so basic repair skills were extremely valuable. You examine the wagon carefully. The wheels appear strong, the wooden frame has survived, the canvas covering has held. The wagon is not perfect, but it has done its job. It carried people through the storm. It protected the supplies. It provided a small piece of safety in a dangerous environment. Nearby, others are checking the animals. The morning air is filled with quiet activity. People speak softly as they work. There is no rush because everyone understands that moving too quickly after a storm can create new problems. The animals need time. The equipment needs inspection. The route needs to be considered. You notice that the travellers are no longer simply reacting to the storm. They are making decisions again. That change is important. During the night, survival meant endurance. Now survival means judgment. Someone studies the direction of the landscape. Someone examines the condition of the trail. Someone discusses whether the group should wait longer or attempt to continue. The decision is not simple. Waiting provides more recovery time, but remaining in place also uses supplies. Moving forward creates progress, but it also introduces new risks. This kind of decision was common for travellers crossing unfamiliar territory. The right choice depended on experience, weather, and circumstances. A fascinating detail from wagon journeys is that many travellers learn to read landscapes almost like maps. The shape of hills, the condition of vegetation, animal movements, and water sources all provided information. People developed a relationship with the land because their safety depended on understanding it. You look across the snowy prairie and try to imagine seeing hidden information in such a vast landscape. Where is the safest route? Where will animals find enough food? Where can the wagon travel without becoming stuck? These questions once belonged to every person crossing these regions. The modern world often separates people from their surroundings. Roads are marked. Directions are provided instantly. Weather information arrives before storms appear. But travellers in 1846 depended on direct observation. They watched, they listened, they learned. Researchers studying frontier journals continue discussing how much knowledge came from formal guides compared with experience gained directly on the trail. Some travellers followed established advice, while others developed their own methods through repeated journeys. The knowledge of survival was constantly shared and adjusted. You think about the lessons learned during the night. Protect warmth, share resources, stay calm, pay attention. Those lessons remain useful now as the group prepares to continue. The first steps after the storm feel different from ordinary travel. Yesterday, movement was routine. Today, every action feels meaningful. The simple act of attaching equipment and preparing animals becomes a reminder of what everyone has survived. Someone makes a small joke about the storm. The laughter is quiet at first. Then others join. It's not because the night was easy. It is because people sometimes laugh after difficult experiences as a way of releasing tension. The prairie has tested everyone, but it has not broken the spirit of the group. You look back at the place where the wagon rested during the storm. Soon there will be little evidence that anyone spent such a difficult night there. Wind and weather will continue changing the landscape, but the memory will remain. The people will remember the sound of the canvas shaking. They will remember the cold. They will remember the fire. They will remember the moment morning arrived. History is often recorded through major events, famous figures, and important dates. But moments like this reveal another side of the past. They show ordinary people dealing with ordinary responsibilities under extraordinary circumstances. No grand ceremony marks this morning. No crowd watches as the wagon begins moving again. There is only a group of travellers preparing for the next mile, and that is exactly what makes the moment meaningful. The wagon begins its careful movement forward. The wheels turn slowly. The animals pull against the frozen ground. The trail ahead remains uncertain. But the journey continues, You feel the movement beneath you and remember the night behind you. The storm is no longer surrounding the wagon, but its lesson remains. The prairie can stop you. It can frighten you. It can challenge everything you planned. But if you adapt, if you cooperate, if you continue one careful step at a time, you can move forward again. The covered wagon leaves the storm behind. The white landscape stretches ahead, and the long road west continues. The prairie slowly returns to movement. After the stillness of the storm, even the smallest sounds feel important. The turning of wagon wheels, the footsteps of animals pressing into the snow, the voices of travellers calling to one another. Life begins again across the frozen landscape, but everyone carries a new awareness. The storm has changed the way you see the journey. Before the blizzard, the prairie was a road. Now it feels like a powerful presence. You understand that every mile ahead requires attention. The land is beautiful, but beauty does not mean safety. The same wide fields that offered space for travel can also hide dangers that are easy to overlook. As the wagon moves forward, you begin noticing the challenges that remain after the storm. Snow covers familiar paths. The ground beneath the surface may be uneven. The animals must work harder. Supplies must be checked more carefully because the delay has changed the group's plans. The journey continues, but it continues differently. A significant reality of 19th century travel is that weather was one of the greatest factors affecting migration routes. Travellers had to consider seasons carefully because arriving too early or too late could create serious problems. Winter conditions, flooding, drought, and difficult terrain all influenced decisions about when and where people travelled. You think about how much modern travellers rely on certainty. A road map tells you where to go. A weather forecast tells you what may happen. A vehicle provides protection. But on the prairie, certainty was rare. Travellers moved through a world where information arrived slowly and decisions had to be made with incomplete knowledge. The group continues across the snowy ground, and you notice how everyone has become more observant. People look at the sky more often. They study the condition of the trail. They pay closer attention to the animals. The storm has taught everyone the value of preparation. You notice small habits that might have seemed unnecessary before. A traveller checks a strap twice. Someone secures a container more carefully. Someone counts supplies again. These actions are not signs of fear. They are signs of experience. A curious detail from frontier journeys is that many travellers carried small collections of practical tools because repairs could determine whether a journey continued or stopped. Simple items such as needles, knives, hammers, and sparse materials could become extremely valuable when people were far from towns and professional assistance. You imagine how different the world felt when a small broken object could create a major problem. Replacing something damaged may take minutes. In 1846, fixing an item often required creativity, patience, and skill. The trail itself becomes a classroom. Every difficult moment teaches something. The storm taught the importance of shelter. The cold taught the importance of warmth. The morning recovery taught the importance of patience. Now the journey forward teaches the importance of caution. You watch the travellers navigate the landscape and realise that survival knowledge was not created from one source. It came from generations of observation, mistakes, successes, and shared experiences. People learned because they had to. They learned because the environment demanded it. The prairie did not explain itself. It required attention. As the wagon moves onward, the conversation occasionally returns to the storm. Someone remembers the strongest wind. Someone talks about the moment the fire seemed threatened. Someone describes how long the night felt. These memories are already becoming stories. That is another fascinating part of human experience. Difficult moments often become important memories later. The same event that felt frightening while it was happening can become a story shared around future fires. You begin wondering how many families later remembered nights like this. How many children heard stories about the storm their parents survived? How many small moments from wagon journeys became part of family history? Scholars have examined how memories of migration were passed between generations and how personal stories shaped ideas about the frontier experience. Some accounts became symbols of determination and courage, while others preserved more ordinary details of daily struggle. Together, these memories created a complex picture of life on the trail. The wagon continues moving. The landscape remains wide and open. The destination is still far away. Yet the group has changed. There is a deeper confidence now. Not the confidence of believing nothing difficult will happen. The confidence of knowing that difficulty can be faced. That difference matters. You have learned that preparation does not remove every problem. Knowledge does not control every situation. Courage does not mean feeling no fear. Instead, resilience comes from responding when problems appear. The afternoon light spreads across the snow, making the prairie shine. For a moment, the landscape almost looks peaceful again. The storm feels distant, even though its memory remains fresh. You notice how quickly nature changes. Yesterday, the same land felt threatening. Today, it looks calm. This is one of the lessons of frontier life. The environment was never fixed. Conditions could change quickly, requiring people to change with them. The travelers continue checking their surroundings because they know the next challenge may arrive without warning. A clear sky can become a storm. A safe path can become difficult. A routine day can become a test. But the group is no longer the same as before. They have shared a night that connected them. They have learned each other's strengths. They have discovered what matters when comfort disappears. You look back briefly toward the direction of the storm. There is no sign of the wagon's resting place. The wind has already begun erasing the evidence. The prairie keeps moving. The snow changes. The grass bends. The sky shifts. Nature remembers nothing, but people remember everything, and that memory becomes another kind of survival tool. The wagon rolls onward through the quiet landscape, carrying not only supplies and belongings, but also the experience of a night that revealed the strength hidden inside ordinary people. The storm is behind you now. The road ahead remains uncertain, but uncertainty is no longer something you fear in the same way. You have learned how to meet it, 1 mile, one decision, one day at a time. The prairie stretches endlessly before you, and the wagon continues its slow movement across the frozen landscape. The wheels leave temporary marks in the snow, but the wind gradually softens them, reminding you that every journey through this land leaves only a brief trace. Yet the memories remain. As the wagon moves farther from the place where the blizzard trapped you, the storm begins changing from a frightening experience into a story that will be carried forward. The fear that filled the nights slowly becomes something else. It becomes a shared memory, a reminder of what happened, a moment that connected everyone inside the wagon. You notice that people speak about the storm differently now. During the night, every sound had carried danger. Now those same sounds become details of a story. The shaking canvas, the powerful wind, the long hours waiting for morning, the small fire fighting against the cold, the wagon that remained standing. The human mind has a remarkable way of transforming difficult experiences into lessons. What once felt impossible becomes proof of endurance. You continue travelling, but your thoughts often return to the lives carried inside this wagon. Every person around you has left something behind. A home, a familiar landscape, a community, a way of life that existed before the journey began. Migration is often described as movement towards something new, but it is also movement away from something known. A major historical reality of 19th century westward migration is that many people left established communities in search of economic opportunity, land ownership, or a different future. The decision to travel was often shaped by both hope and necessity. For many families, the journey represented possibility, but it also required leaving behind people and places they loved. You look at the travellers beside you and imagine the invisible things they carry. Not just clothing and supplies, memories, traditions, stories. The wagon holds physical objects, but each person carries an entire personal history. Someone may remember a childhood home. Someone may remember a friend who stayed behind. Someone may remember a familiar street, a family gathering, or a landscape that looked completely different from this open prairie. These memories do not disappear because the journey continues. They travel with the person. A small and interesting detail about emigrant journeys is that many travellers kept objects with sentimental value, even when space was extremely limited. A small letter, a family item, or a personal keepsake could remain important despite the practical need to reduce possessions. These objects represented connections to the past and helped people maintain a sense of identity during enormous changes. You understand why? When everything around you changes, familiar objects become anchors. A small item can remind you who you are. A remembered voice can remind you where you came from. A familiar story can remind you why you continue. The wagon moves beneath the open sky, and the conversation becomes less focused on survival and more focused on the future. People begin discussing where they hope to settle. They imagine homes, fields, communities, and new beginnings. The storm is behind them. The destination is ahead. But the journey between those 2 points remains long. You think about the emotional complexity of such a path. It would be easy to describe these travellers as simply brave or adventurous, but real human experiences are rarely that simple. A person can be excited and afraid. A person can feel hopeful and lonely. A person can believe in a better future while missing the past. That mixture of emotions is part of what makes historical journeys so meaningful. Researchers studying migration experiences often explore how travellers balanced optimism with uncertainty. Personal writings from the period reveal that many people expressed both confidence about their decisions and sadness about what they had left behind. Moving forward did not mean forgetting the past. You see this balance in the wagon group. Someone laughs while remembering a difficult moment. Someone becomes quiet when speaking about home. Someone looks ahead with excitement. Someone looks back with longing. All of these feelings exist together. The prairie continues around you, vast and silent. The landscape seems unchanged, but the people moving through it have been transformed by what they experienced. The storm became a dividing point. There was life before the blizzard. There is life after it. Before the storm, the travellers knew they might face hardship. After the storm, they know exactly what they can endure. That knowledge creates a different kind of confidence. Not the confidence that nothing bad will happen. The confidence that difficult moments can be survived. You notice how people begin sharing more freely with one another. The barrier between strangers is weakened. The experience of spending a night together in a fragile wagon during a dangerous storm created a connection that ordinary travel might not have produced. Hardship can create unexpected friendships. A person who was once only another traveller becomes someone whose voice brought comfort during a difficult night. A person who was once unknown becomes someone whose actions are remembered. This is one of the quieter stories of frontier history. Not only the movement of people across land, but the relationships formed along the way. Historians still argue whether the strongest bonds among wagon travellers came mainly from shared danger, or from the broader culture of cooperation already present among many emigrant communities. Some emphasize the pressure of survival, while others highlight traditions of mutual assistance carried from earlier communities. Either way, cooperation played an important role in helping people face uncertainty. The afternoon begins fading toward evening, and the wagon prepares for another night on the trail. This night is different. The weather is calmer. The fear is smaller. The people are more prepared. You watch the familiar routines return. Supplies are organized. Animals are checked. A place to rest is prepared. Life continues. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson from the storm. The travellers did not stop being ordinary people. They did not become invincible. They simply continued. They carried their memories. They carried their hopes. They carried the knowledge that even the harshest night eventually passes. The wagon rolls onward beneath the open sky, carrying people toward an uncertain future. But behind every mile travelled is a story, and behind every story is a person who kept moving. The journey becomes quieter after the storm, not because there is nothing left to experience, but because the travellers now carry a deeper understanding of the landscape around them. The prairie no longer feels like a simple road leading somewhere else. It feels like a place with its own character, its own challenges, and its own lessons. You watch the wagon move slowly across the open land and notice details that you might have ignored before. The way the wind moves through the grass, the way clouds gather along the horizon, the way animals respond to changes in the weather, the way the ground beneath the wheels tells a story. Before the blizzard, you are focused on reaching the destination. Now you're more aware of the journey itself. The prairie teaches patience. It teaches observation. It teaches respect. These lessons are not learned through books or instructions. They come from experience. They come from standing beneath an open sky and realizing that humans are part of a much larger world. A widely accepted fact about life on the 19th century frontier is that settlers and travellers had to develop a close relationship with the natural environment because their daily survival depended on understanding local conditions. Weather, water sources, animal behaviour, and seasonal changes all influence decisions about movement and settlement. You begin to see the prairie differently because of this. The land is not empty. It is full of information. A person who knows how to read it can discover what another person might miss. The shape of the ground reveals where water may collect. The condition of plants reveals changes in the season. The movement of animals reveals shifts in the environment. Knowledge of the land becomes a form of protection. The travellers continue carrying this knowledge forward. Someone points out a change in the sky. Someone notices the condition of the trail. Someone explains how the landscape may look different after a storm. These conversations are part of the journey. They are not simply casual observations. They represent generations of experience being shared between people. A curious detail from frontier life is that many travellers relied on natural signs to guide decisions, but these methods were not always perfectly reliable. A familiar pattern could change, and an experienced traveller could still be surprised by unusual conditions. The environment offered clues, but it never offered guarantees. That uncertainty shaped the way people thought. They prepared for possibilities. They respected warnings. They remained flexible. You realize that this mindset is very different from the modern expectation that every problem has an immediate solution. Today, people often seek control through technology and information. Travellers in 1846 had fewer tools, so they developed something else: adaptability. They could not prevent every storm. They could not remove every danger. They could only respond. The wagon continues forward, and the group settles back into its daily routines. The rhythm of travel returns: morning preparation, hours of movement, evening rest. But the storm remains present in small ways. Someone checks the fire supplies more carefully. Someone stores equipment more securely. Someone watches the sky longer than before. The experience has changed behaviour. This is how lessons often work. They do not always arrive as dramatic revelations. Sometimes they appear as small habits repeated afterward. You think about the travellers who crossed these landscapes year after year. Each journey added more knowledge. Each difficult moment contributed to a larger understanding of survival. Communities learned from experience. Families passed knowledge between generations. Travelers shared warnings with those following behind. The trail itself became a network of human memory. Researchers studying migration patterns continue exploring how much frontier knowledge was passed through written guides compared with spoken traditions between travelers. Written records provide valuable information, but many practical skills were likely learned through observation and conversation rather than formal instruction. You imagine a person learning how to prepare for winter travel not from a manual, but from watching someone more experienced how to protect supplies, how to care for animals, how to choose a campsite, how to recognize danger. Knowledge moved from one person to another. The prairie became a place where wisdom was carried by voices. The wagon stops again as evening approaches, and you notice something different about the group. The travellers are still tired. The journey is still difficult. But there is a sense of confidence that was missing before the storm. They know themselves better now. They know the wagon better. They know the people beside them better. The difficult night created something valuable: understanding. You look back at the storm as more than a moment of danger. It was a lesson about limits. It showed how small humans can seem compared with nature. But it also revealed the strength created through cooperation and preparation. The prairie did not become less powerful. The travellers simply became more prepared. This is an important distinction. Humans have always adapted to environments that challenge them. Across history, people have lived in deserts, mountains, forests, and frozen regions. They survived not because these places became easy, but because people learned how to exist within them. The covered wagon journey represents one example of that larger human story. A small group moving through a massive landscape, a fragile shelter facing powerful weather. Ordinary people making difficult choices. You settle near the wagon as another evening arrives. The fire begins glowing again. The sounds of preparation return. The animals rest nearby. The same routines that existed before the storm continue, but they feel different now. The travellers are carrying a new awareness. They have discovered that comfort can be temporary. They have learned that preparation matters. They have learned that people are often strongest when they depend on one another. The prairie stretches into the distance, quiet and endless. The wind moves gently through the grass. The sky changes colours above the horizon. For a moment, everything feels peaceful. You understand that this landscape contains both beauty and danger. It can offer opportunity and create hardship. It can inspire dreams and test determination. That balance is what made frontier life so challenging. And perhaps that balance is what makes it so fascinating. The story of the wagon is not only about surviving a blizzard. It is about learning to live with uncertainty. It is about accepting that the world cannot always be controlled. It is about discovering strength in moments when comfort disappears. The travellers continue westward. The wheels keep turning. The prairie remains vast, and the lessons of the storm travel with them. The trail continues beyond the memory of the blizzard. Days pass and the frozen landscape slowly changes. The snow becomes less dominant. The sharpness of winter begins to soften. The prairie returns to its familiar patterns, with open skies above and endless land stretching in every direction. Yet the travellers are not the same people who entered the storm. The wagon still carries the same supplies. The same wheels move across the ground. The same animals pull the load. But something inside the group has changed. They have experienced a moment when everything depended on careful choices and cooperation. They have discovered that the journey ahead will not always follow their plans. Weather, terrain, and unexpected challenges will continue shaping their path. The trail has become more than a route, it has become a teacher. You notice that people now approach each day with greater attention. They wake earlier to inspect conditions. They prepare more carefully before moving. They watch the sky and discuss possibilities before making decisions. The blizzard created caution, but it did not create fear. That difference matters. Fear can stop movement. Experience creates awareness. The travellers continue because they have learned how to respond. A major historical reality of westward travel is that many emigrants faced repeated challenges throughout their journeys, including difficult weather, limited resources, unfamiliar terrain, and physical exhaustion. Surviving one hardship did not mean the journey became easy. It meant travellers gained knowledge that could help them face future difficulties. You think about how many moments like this existed along frontier trails. Not every challenge became famous. Not every struggle was recorded in detail. Many important experiences remained only in family memories or personal stories. A wagon journey was built from countless ordinary decisions: when to stop, where to camp, how much food to use, whether to continue or wait. Each decision shaped the outcome. The group moves forward, and the landscape begins offering new challenges. The road becomes uneven in places. The weather changes again. The animals need attention. Supplies must continue being managed. The storm is no longer the immediate concern, but the lessons from it remain useful. You notice people becoming more aware of small risks. A loose wheel is repaired before it becomes a serious problem. A damaged piece of equipment is fixed before it fails. A change in weather is considered before it becomes dangerous. This is how experience transforms people. It does not make the world predictable. It makes people better prepared for uncertainty. A fascinating detail about frontier travellers is that many developed strong habits of preventative care because waiting until something failed could create much larger problems. Maintaining equipment, protecting supplies, and monitoring animals were everyday responsibilities that helped avoid disasters. The modern world often celebrates dramatic solutions, but on the trail, prevention was often the true skill. The best problem was the one that never happened. You look at the wagon and think about how much knowledge is contained within such a simple vehicle. The covered wagon seems basic compared with modern transportation, but it represented careful engineering adapted to the conditions of its time. It needed to carry heavy loads. It needed to survive rough terrain. It needed to be repaired by ordinary people far from workshops. It was not perfect. Nothing on the trail was perfect, but it was practical, and practicality often determined survival. The travellers continue sharing stories about the blizzard. Each person remembers different details. One remembers the sound of the wind. Another remembers the cold. Another remembers the moment when morning finally appeared. The same event exists differently in each person's memory. This is one reason personal history is so interesting. Two people can experience the same moment and carry away different meanings. Historians still debate whether pioneer stories should be understood mainly as records of hardship or as examples of personal determination shaped by later generations. Some accounts were preserved because they represented courage and perseverance, while others reveal ordinary concerns about family, work, and daily survival. The truth lies somewhere between the dramatic and the ordinary. You realize that the most powerful part of the story is not the storm itself. It is the people inside it. The parents trying to protect children, the travellers sharing supplies, the individuals staying awake so others could rest, the quiet acts of responsibility that rarely appear in famous stories. History is often remembered through large events, but human experiences are built from small actions. The wagon moves forward through another evening, and the familiar routines return. A fire is prepared, food is organized, the animals rest. People settle into another night beneath the open sky. This time the darkness feels different, not because the prairie has changed, because the travellers have changed. They know what the night can bring. They know what they can survive. There is confidence in that knowledge. You sit near the fire and watch the flames move gently. The warmth feels especially meaningful after remembering the cold night trapped in the blizzard. A simple fire, a simple meal, a simple shelter. These things might seem ordinary in comfortable times, but after hardship, ordinary things become precious. The wagon journey continues toward the horizon. The destination remains ahead, still uncertain and still distant. There will be more miles to travel, more decisions to make, and more moments when preparation matters. But the travellers carry something valuable now: experience. They carry the memory of the storm and the knowledge that difficult moments can be endured. The prairie remains enormous. The sky remains wide. The road remains challenging. Yet the wagon keeps moving, and perhaps that is the greatest story of all. Not that people conquered the wilderness, not that they controlled the forces around them, but that they learned how to live within a world they could never fully control. They adapted, they cooperated, they continued. The wheels turn slowly beneath the fading light. The trail stretches onward, and the journey goes beyond the storm. The final evening on the prairie arrives gently. The wagon has travelled beyond the memory of the storm, but the night of the blizzard remains close. It is carried in the conversations of the travellers, in the careful way they prepare their camp, and in the quiet appreciation they now have for simple comforts. You watch the sun lower across the horizon, painting the landscape with soft colours. The same prairie that once disappeared beneath darkness and snow now appears calm again. The grass moves slowly in the breeze. The animals rest nearby. The wagon stands quietly beneath the open sky. It is difficult to believe that this peaceful place was once filled with such powerful winds, but that is the nature of the frontier. The landscape could change quickly. A beautiful evening could become a dangerous night. A familiar trail could become impossible to follow. A simple wagon could become the only protection between people and the elements. You sit beside the small fire and think about everything that has happened since the storm began. The journey was never only about reaching a destination. It was about the moments between places, the mornings of preparation, the long afternoons of travel, the evenings spent beside a fire, the difficult nights when survival became the only goal. The covered wagon carried more than supplies. It carried hopes. It carried memories. It carried people trying to build a different future. A significant fact about 19th century migration is that many travellers who crossed the Western Trails never experienced a simple journey from beginning to end. Their paths included delays, unexpected hardships, and moments when plans had to change. Success often depended not on avoiding every difficulty, but on adapting to problems as they appeared. You look at the wagon differently now. At the beginning of the journey it seemed like a machine for movement. During the storm it became a shelter. After the storm it became a reminder. It showed what people could accomplish with limited resources and shared determination. The travellers begin preparing for another night. The routine feels familiar now. Supplies are organised, animals are checked, bedding is arranged. The same tasks that once felt like chores now feel almost comforting. There is security in routine. There is peace in knowing what comes next. The fire burns steadily, and the voices around you become softer as darkness approaches. Someone tells a story about the storm. Another person adds a detail that everyone remembers differently. A moment that was frightening at the time has already started becoming part of the group's shared history. This is how memories are created, not only through major events, through conversations, through small details, through the stories people choose to keep. A curious detail from many frontier accounts is that travellers often remembered ordinary moments just as strongly as major challenges. A particular meal, a funny mistake, a friendly conversation, or a beautiful landscape could remain in memory for years. Hardship was part of the journey, but it was not the entire journey. You think about the quiet moments that existed alongside the struggle. The warmth of a fire after a cold day, the sound of animals resting peacefully, the laughter of people sharing stories. the feeling of seeing the trail continue after believing the storm might stop everything. These moments reveal something important about human endurance. People do not survive only through strength. They survive through meaning. They survive because they believe their effort leads somewhere. They survive because they share their burdens with others. They survive because even difficult days contain moments worth remembering. Researchers studying pioneer experiences often explore the difference between the reality of migration and the legends that developed afterward. Historians still argue whether frontier stories became exaggerated over time to represent certain ideals of courage and independence, or whether they accurately reflect the extreme challenges many travellers faced. The answer is complex because both memory and reality shaped how these journeys were understood. The people inside this wagon were not legends while they lived through the storm. They were simply people. They felt cold. They felt uncertainty. They became tired. They worried. They hoped. And that is exactly what makes their experience meaningful. You look toward the darkness beyond the fire and imagine the countless other wagons that cross similar landscapes. Thousands of people move through these regions carrying their belongings and their dreams. Some reached their destinations, some changed their plans, some turned back. Each journey was different, but every journey contained moments of decision, moments of fear, moments of courage. The prairie does not remember their names. The wind does not preserve their footsteps. The snow eventually covers their tracks, yet their experiences remain because people continue telling their stories. The night grows quieter. The fire becomes smaller. The stars appear above the open land. You feel the peacefulness of the moment and remember the chaos of the blizzard. The contrast makes the calm feel even more valuable. A warm fire feels warmer after cold. A quiet night feels quieter after a storm. A safe shelter feels more precious after uncertainty. The covered wagon rests beneath the sky, just as it did during the dangerous night. But everything has changed. The travellers have changed. You have changed. The storm revealed something that every generation learns in its own way. Human beings are fragile. The world is powerful. But together, with patience, preparation, and compassion, people can endure remarkable challenges. The journey continues beyond this evening. There are still miles ahead. There are still unknown places waiting. There are still difficulties that cannot be predicted. But the travellers move forward carrying something stronger than certainty. They carry experience. They carry memory. They carry the knowledge that even the longest night eventually becomes morning. And as the wagon rests beneath the quiet prairie sky, the final glow of the campfire reminds you of the small but powerful truth at the heart of this story. Survival is not always about defeating the storm. Sometimes it is simply about staying together until the storm passes. The night grows softer now. The prairie becomes a distant whisper. The wagon rests quietly beneath the stars, no longer surrounded by the fierce winds of the blizzard, but by the peaceful sounds of an open landscape. The fire fades gently, leaving behind a warm glow that slowly disappears into the darkness. You can let the journey settle in your thoughts. The cold wind, the shaking canvas, the small fire, the shared stories, the quiet strength of ordinary people who continued forward despite uncertainty. The travellers are now far beyond that difficult night, but the memory remains like a small light carried through time, a reminder that even in the hardest moments people find ways to create warmth, connection, and hope. Allow yourself to imagine the wagon moving slowly across the quiet prairie, the wheels turning steadily, the sky stretching endlessly above. There is no need to hurry now. There is nowhere else to be. The storm has passed. The road has continued. The night has become peaceful. And for a little while, you can simply rest here, beneath the same wide sky that watched over those travellers long ago. Let the sounds of the prairie fade gently. Let the fire become smaller. Let the journey become a quiet memory. The wagon keeps moving somewhere beyond the horizon, carrying stories that survived long after the footprints disappeared. And now you can close your eyes knowing that even the longest, coldest nights eventually give way to morning. Sweet dreams,